removed from the consent agenda. All right, at this time, do we have a motion for the consent agenda?
Move to approve consent agenda items alpha through India.
Thank you. All right, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions from the public? Hearing none, council? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
And opposed, same sign. Passes 5-0. All right, at this time, we'll move on to our action items. And action item A is to approve the NERDA grant award for boating and fishing upgrades to Shoreline, Woodland Park, and Vista Park. And Samantha.
Ron Pulley will give the
Okay.
presentation. I tried, but you know he wouldn't miss this.
I was going to say, this is way too big.
Right.
Welcome, Mr. Pulley.
Thank you. Good to see you, council. Happy New Year to all of you. Before you, you have a summary developed by Sam Wilson of the NERDA grant that our mayor worked very hard with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, as well as the group for the trustee implementation group for the Deepwater Horizon Reconciliation Damage Assessment Group. These funds we're expecting these funds in the amount of $1.1 million to make improvements to our waterside parks and our waterfront parks that will enhance the recreation fishing opportunities for residents of our city and our local community. Excuse me. Those improvements include ADA accessible fishing piers and new ramps located at Woodland Park, Vista Park, and Shoreline Park South, as well as some really unique enhancements at Shoreline Park South, including a fish cleaning station, fish disposal station, new amenities, vending opportunities there, as well as personal watercraft launches. The new pier at Woodland Park will include, as I said, an ADA accessible personal watercraft launch, as well as additional parking opportunities and a handicapped accessible route from the parking area to the boat launch facilities. The grant opportunity is exciting. We are hoping to be able to get the final authorization in the springtime and move forward with it, and we anticipate hopefully completing the project before the end of the fiscal year.
That was wonderful. That'll make a huge difference in all three of our parks. So the plans that you're talking about sound good.
Thank you for your efforts on this behalf. May the
Oh, you're welcome.
Mayor and Council, just particularly in regards to the recommendation, and we appreciate Ron giving the full background and the scope of what's in front of you, but tonight is just the approval of the amount not to exceed $108,632 for the match requirement for the grant. The city attorney, of course, has drafted a master services agreement that is under review by Florida Fish and Wildlife. And if that's approved, then we will pick one of our two consultant engineers within the MSA in order to complete those designs, which will be brought back to you for consideration.
Okay. All right.
Ron, can I ask you a question? What, you say fish disposal, what does that exactly mean?
It's going to be a grinder station that will connect into the sewer system.
Really?
It'll be,
Wow.
yeah, it'll be
Mr.
a
President?
grinder station and a pump that will take it all away.
So it will be carcasses being thrown into the water?
There won't be carcasses thrown into the water, and that smelly dumpster will,
Yeah, those are always two key issues, especially with the kids down there swimming and stuff like that. You start
Exactly.
doing that kind of stuff. Okay, I was just curious with that.
You could sell it as chum to the fishermen on the way out.
I'm sorry.
You could sell it as chum to the fishermen on the way out.
Yeah. We don't have a containment unit.
I did have one quick question. I think this is fantastic stuff. The I saw where there's a floating pier
Yes.
in the sound.
The,
Is that gonna stand up?
each of the three handicapped accessible launches will be floating devices at each of the parks, Vista Park, Wayside Park, or Woodland Park, and Shoreline Park.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the south, the,
Wait.
in the south side there, with all the south wind coming in, it'd be pretty brutal on there.
Right.
Floating docks.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
Move for approval.
All right, we have a motion to
Second.
approve and a second. Any further questions or discussion? Anyone from the public? All right, hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and opposed, same sign. Passes 5-0.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you. All right, our next item is to authorize the award of bid to Carter's Equipment and Specialty Products of Tallahassee, Florida for a transit van and CCTV sewer pipeline camera system for $296,658. Thank you, Thomas.
No, council members, I'd always have to follow the bid stuff with my simple stuff. But this is a camera van that will allow us to inspect sewers. It is a budgeted expense and it came in under budget by more than $50,000. Staff recommends this purchase.
Okay. That was a lot of information you attached to this, and it was kind of cool to see how it's
Yes.
going to look and what all it will do. All right, council, do we have a motion?
Move to approve.
A second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any questions or comments from the public? Hearing none, council, questions, comments?
No question.
Okay.
I was just, the only thing that concerned me was the only one that responded and did, it wasn't any other responders to that. So I know it's kind of a pricey vehicle, but I know we discussed in the past that, having that vehicle would be imperative to the department for future use as opposed to paying an outside contractor to come in and do it, so have a
Yeah.
loan. But it's a lot of money, and you're comfortable with the fact that you only have one respondent?
Yes, and it was the preferred brand. That camera is the system that everybody's like. And that's probably why, is because the guy knew how to price it for us. And it's been a seller's market these days. So I am glad we have run it.
So obviously it comes already installed, ready to go.
That is
And I
a,
noticed further in our agenda, we got a transit van we're gonna get for like $29,000. So you kind of extrapolate and you see how much the camera system costs.
that transit van isn't sewer by sewer, and I don't think it's diesel, and that is something that we really need for the camera van, because it will have to go off-road.
That's the same question. Yeah, I had asked the same.
There it is.
All right, any other questions for Thomas? All right, we'll take our vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And opposed, same sign. Passes 5-0. Good work, Thomas. Are you up with us next too?
I am.
All right, this is to authorize the purchase of 6 vehicles for Public Works Department from One Step Automotive for $202,482. Thomas.
Thank you. Speaking again of seller's market, we have had trouble bidding vehicles off of state contracts. Last year we had 3 vehicles just canceled. They said we can't supply them. So we found a dealership who had these vehicles available and could offer them to us under state pricing. So we're playing catch up. Some of these should have been bought last year, but we could not do that. Are there any questions?
Well, I can attest to looking at the price of that transit Ford van for $29,000. That's a really good buy. I'm in the service business, and I can't find them for almost under $40,000 right now. And I'm surprised that you're able to locate these and get it at such a good price. So
And,
looking
and,
at that, it's a good deal.
and it actually held them until tomorrow. So I didn't tell him tomorrow and say, yes, they approved, and then they didn't.
Okay,
I could
that
use
sounds
that.
good. And I wondered too, Thomas, and you answered that about 6 at one time, so I know usually we stagger the numbers that you have to buy in a given year, so I understand. They weren't there. Okay, one more, which is this, Thomas, also, the sewer cross connection.
Is that it?
What-
In the
oh,
bill.
oh, that's very true. Okay, all in favor?
Also make the motion.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second, all right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and opposed, same sign. I knew I would get through. Okay. All right, next on our agenda is the sewer cross connection, and that's the proposed ODEP consent order. So, and I believe we're going to turn this over to our city attorney, Mary Jane Bass.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. I think everyone is aware of the background here. We have communicated with you before on it and had discussions on it in our meetings. And we have, laid it out in a summary fashion in your agenda packet tonight. But as you recall, on April 1st, 2021, a private contractor inadvertently hooked a sewer line running from a private home into the Midway Water System's water main instead of hooking it in, as they should have, to our sewer force main. We did not learn of this until the fall, and initially it wasn't apparent even what was happening. Midway was getting some reports of problems with water pressure and clogged lines and things. And after some investigation, and finally it was the cross connection was discovered on October 18th. We immediately responded. The city manager reached out to Midway, to others. The problem was immediately corrected, and we jumped in as much as we could to try to rectify the situation, to assist with providing alternative water supplies to the residences that were affected, and to go into each one of those residences that were potentially affected and conduct sampling so that we could know, and the community could know when the problem was resolved and the water was safe. And so there was a lot of activity surrounding that. The city manager also, with my assistance, we conducted an investigation into how this had happened and the events leading to it, and then our after action, and we submitted that report to the Florida Department of Environmental Protection in response to a warning letter that they had sent to the city on October 19, 2021. We also met on November 9th with DEP officials and had discussions with them, answered their questions, and presented, what we believe to be the facts surrounding this. Similar warning letters were sent to Midway Water System and to the private contractor Brown Construction, and they also had meetings. They also were responded to warning letters, and now we are all in the position of having received from DEP proposed consent orders to resolve what they believe to be violations of Florida statutes and regulations. For the city, the violation that they have cited for us is one, and it is simply the fact that the cross connection occurred. Cross connections such as this are prohibited under the law, and it was simply the fact that it occurred and that we, in their view, had some involvement and responsibility for that. That is the reason they were citing us for that violation. They cited the other entities for other violations. All of us were cited for the cross connection, but the city was only cited for that one, and it was, again, strictly the fact of the cross connection having been made and occurred. They have offered to resolve the matter with the city by having the city pay a $1 million fine or to implement $1.5 million of projects that would be in lieu of the payment of the fine. And in either of those scenarios, we would also be responsible for paying $5,000 in costs incurred by DEP to investigate the matter. We've laid out for you in your agenda memo what the options that I believe the city manager believes you have in terms of responding to this. They had asked for a response as of January 17th. We asked them for an extension so that this could be brought to you in your regular meeting without having to hastily call a special meeting, and they were agreeable to that. And so we have advised them that we would, get your direction tonight and then proceed forward with implementing it and respond to them with the city's position by January 24th. So the options are, one, to just reject the offer and contest their determination that the city violated DEP regulations with regard to the Quest connection. In that instance, it is, I would say, most likely, in fact, definitely, that they would engage in adversarial proceedings with us. Typically, they will take the matter to an administrative proceeding before an administrative law judge. In this instance, they also could take us straight into court to try to enforce the matter against us and have the court impose the fine. In this case, too, there's no remedial action to take because the matter, the cross-connection area has already been corrected. The second option would be to accept the offer and pay the $1 million fine and $5,000 in costs. The city manager and I do not recommend this because, as you know, your water and sewer fund operates as an enterprise of the city. And so it operates like a private business. It has to pay for itself. And therefore, you can't take money out of your general fund or other places and dedicated funds to just straight out pay a fine. You would have to recover that cost of that fine through a rate cut. And we have consulted with Reftelis on that, or a consultant on, fortunately we just did a rate study, so we have a lot of information about what appropriate rates are. But this would result in a fairly significant rate increase in order to recover those. It could be spread out over time, but again, you'd be going back to your ratepayers and asking for more than you are currently asking them for in order to recover that money. The third option is to accept the offer and agree to pay the $5,000 in costs and implement these in lieu of cash projects, the in-kind projects valued at $1.5 million. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but we will have to look to juggling and shuffling around some of our capital improvement plans and adding to them. Because in order to do that, you cannot do something that you're already planning to do. And as you know, you have a capital improvement plan that stretches out over the next several years through which you are using money that we did make in selling off properties owned by the utility or by the city over the last several years, and that had been used for effluent spray fields. With the golf course, for example, of course, we still have that ability through an easement to use it for effluent disposal. There were other properties that we simply didn't need anymore for the capacity for effluent disposal, and therefore we were able to sell them. And now we do have funds available to implement capital improvement. So we have a good number of projects that are on the books and planned. However, in order to satisfy this $1.5 million value of an in lieu of cash fund, we would have to come up with something new. So that is one alternative. Of course, it would mean, again, perhaps deferring some other things. We would have to figure it out from the money side, but I'll address that in just a moment. And then, of course, we can go back to DEP and suggest an alternative settlement proposal, maybe a lesser amount. I will tell you that on Friday, Samantha and I had some discussions with DEP about that possibility, and we explored with them, we asked them to articulate their position to us. I will just tell you, we're not receptive to reducing the fine at all. And their position, as expressed by their attorney, is that it is based on 200 days, and that is counting from April 1 to October 18th when it was corrected. We pointed out, both in correspondence and in this discussion with them, that, you know, there wasn't even power to the house that could have operated the low-pressure grinder pump that would push the wastewater into the main. It wasn't even possible to do that prior to August 27, when temporary power was hooked up at the house. That temporary power wasn't at that point used for this, and we know that because on September 8th, we learned, the city did, that the grinder pump that was installed by the residents and homeowners plumber, it was insufficient to pump the wastewater from the house into the main. And again, the house was, you know, it was under construction when the error occurred back in the spring. It was not completed until the fall. The homeowners didn't even move in and activate their sewer service until September 21. And so, you know, we know, and we found all this out in our investigation, and we confirmed some of these facts through looking at county records and otherwise. But, you know, it wasn't possible for there to have been any harm for more than, you know, for much less than the 200 days. Really, it would have only been from, you know, the potential was only there from September 8th until October 18th. And again, we don't even think it was really activated and really happening before September 21 when the homeowners moved in. All that said, DEP's response was, but the cross connection was made on April 1, and a cross connection is prohibited. And they, you know, the interpretation of the law is that with environmental law, it is joint and several liability, and it is strict liability. And strict liability means it doesn't matter whether there was negligence or, you know, whose fault it was, is simply the fact that it happened. And so with that strict liability, their belief is that the fine should begin to run on April 1, which was the day that the error was made. So that is their position. I believe our discussions led us to believe that they would fight this hard, and that if we do challenge it, which again, we can continue if it is your direction to us to try to have discussions with them to reduce this, or you know, our alternative recommendation would be to let's look at the $1.5 million value in capital improvement projects and present a proposal. The process for that would be that you will have 60 days after agreeing to and signing the consent order, if you so direct the mayor to do so, choosing that option tonight. We will have 60 days from the date of the effective date of that order to present to them a proposal for capital improvement projects or other environmentally beneficial projects that could be implemented in lieu of the cash payment. They did indicate to us, and I will say this was a better part of the conversation. We did go into the fact that we're a small city, and we do, operate this enterprise fund, and, we do have plans to take some steps to undertake capital improvement over the years, and we've done some things we think that have put us in a good position, but we're, we don't have all of the resources in the world to resolve something. And their response to that was that they will be flexible in developing this plan, and they will work with us to it. They're willing to have informal discussions as to what they think would be, they can't tell us for sure what would be approved at the staff level. They would have to, but they can give us guidance on whether or not they think a plan and components of a plan are workable and would be approved ultimately by those in the department who will have the final say. They would be amenable to a mix of projects. They would be amenable to scheduling it out. And I will say, even if there was a cash component to it, they said they would be willing to look at a payment plan so that it doesn't have to all be paid at once. And we, as at the staff level, have looked at, what some options might be, and tonight is not the night to explore those because we haven't, we wanted to get your direction first. But just to give you some idea, I mean, we would think that it needs to be a project that benefits the area impacted by this, and one that benefits the utility itself, and improvements that will allow us to operate, in upper game and operations and all, which of course we always want to do, and that it will have an appreciable environmental benefit to the community. We can also consider a component of it to be the dedication of lands that are environmentally sensitive, so if you got estuaries or wetlands or any endangered species habitat that are within the lands that the property the city owns, we could potentially, put some restrictions and protections on those, and they would, or donate those lands to the state. There are ways we could do that as a part of this, and it would, those would have to be valued, but again, a potential component. It cannot be land that would otherwise be eligible for development. So, for example, as we've just sold off to affluent spray fields to developers. However, that land, even if we hadn't sold it off, it wouldn't have been land that was available for this because it's not environmentally sensitive land. We do have one spray field that has some, that we continue to own, that has some wetlands area in it, and so to protect it, because wetlands can, with offsets and mitigations, there are, circumstances in which they can be developed. So again, that would be the point of, if we determine we have some land, and that seems to be a good feature, we might want to propose as a component of it. I don't think we have enough that would be valued at 1.5 million to do the whole thing in that regard. But again, we could do a combination of projects in addition to what we've already laid out in our capital improvement plans. And they did indicate to us they would be flexible in working with us to come up with an approach that they could have approved. So I think that kind of gives you the overview of what we see as your 4 options. And if you choose option 3, which is again the in lieu of projects, we would then again come back to you before submitting our final proposal to DEP. We would work to develop it at staff level, discuss it with them, and then come back to you for a final approval if that's the direction you choose to go in. But we felt that we had to bring this to you. We had to hear from you. You may have different thoughts on it. And again, our recommendations at the staff level are number 3 or number 4. But at the same time, we do think that, I do want you to know that hearing from them, I don't know how receptive they would be to number 4, and we may find ourselves in the adversarial situation with them in any event if we go that route. So with that, I'm open it up to questions, discussions, unless Samantha wants to add.
Yeah. Any discussion?
So
questions?
on a timely payment plan, up to 5 years or up to 2 years, have they give us any type of guidelines on that? If we said we'll just pay the penalty, the $1 million?
They did not, but I do sense that they would stretch it out. So I think, I would certainly be comfortable asking for 5 years and seeing what they say. I got the impression they would work with us to make, a stretch out doable, because they do understand, their limitations, that,
Right.
Again, we can't just pluck the money out of any fund.
And have we looked at the impact, what it would look like on a 5-year basis for that kind of $200,000 a year?
Yes, so Ralph, tell us, as Mary Jane mentioned, because we had just completed, as you know, Councilman, a 1.5-year long rate study at the cost of $100,000 in an attempt to catch up on deferred maintenance, and also have a fee that is the same inside and outside of the city. We were able to go back to them, and they already had timely, relevant information at their fingertips. And so if you were to look at a 1-year recovery, you'd be looking at an 18% rate increase. And we definitely brought that to the attention of DEP during our initial phone call. And as Mary Jane shared, their general counsel said that DEP has broad discretion. And if they are looking at infrastructure improvements that, you know, are a benefit as we described, and he said we have broad latitude. So I felt like that was an invitation that they were going to be very reasonable. Again, they emphasized it cannot be something already in our capital improvement plan.
Right.
So what that certainly means is that if we don't want to put a burden on our ratepayers, then it is going to be 5 years or more. Ideally, we would start that project in year 1, but it would be a multi-phased plan that we would submit to DEP. So I really felt like that was a positive takeaway between the conversation, and I just sat and took notes, but the conversation between our legal counsel and DEP's. That was the one positive takeaway that Samantha got from the whole conversation, is they had broad discretion and responded favorably to a long-term capital improvement plan.
So you said it would be 18% in 1 year, but you didn't say what it would be over 5 years.
Over 5 years, it's closer to 4%.
4%.
Yes.
Okay.
And let me just say that, you know, we do typically, and I think our rate study indicated that, you know, we can contemplate that just our increased costs of operations and maintenance, we will typically have some rate increase
Right.
each year in the range of 4 to 6%, so this would be on top of that.
Excellent, yeah, I understand. Okay.
My concern is I wouldn't want to approve anything that's going to cost the ratepayers back in the fine, where they're going to ultimately pay for the fine. And what does the DP do with this money?
Well, again, we're latching on to positive here, and that is why we're recommending option 3, because it would not have been a positive conversation if we had asked them what they were going to do with that money.
And I think
How does that benefit the affected people?
We did raise that.
they do put the money into, they have various trust funds for environmental, you know, projects, cleanups, things like that, and it would likely go, I don't know, you know, we can ask and find out what designated fund it would go into. I don't think that's been provided to us, but it would go into some trust fund that DEP uses to provide money for cleanups and environmental projects around the state. So,
And not directed to the individuals involved. So my next question would be then, is there any project, part of the wastewater treatment facilities upgrades that we have not put into the plan that we may want to look at to do that would benefit the ratepayers and citizens in a longer period out where we're using that money that's going to benefit the locals as opposed to.
Thomas we're having those conversations obviously with Thomas Lambert, Public Works Director now. To answer your question, yes, there are conversations that Mayor Pro Tem Tom Nail has had with the Gulf Breeze Regional Water Board that haven't made it to the council yet because they weren't a deferred capital project and they weren't a top priority. But there are environmentally sensitive, worthy projects that are not currently in your CIP that already the Regional Water Board has discussed in the past. And so Thomas is looking at those, you know, now we're looking at phases, maybe doing a blending. So, you know, again, I don't want to get too specific because I can't, very honestly, but the answer is yes, they do exist. And what appeals to us most are those projects that the Regional Water Board have already been discussing as being desirable, but aren't already in the CIP.
And that could be something we could do.
Yes, sir, and so to reiterate Mary Jane's comment of next steps, if you were to go with option 3, you would have that 60 days, and ideally, whatever recommendations that the staff has, and I certainly expect that there will be more than one, those would go to your Regional Water Board, which is comprised of a majority non-city residents on that board, representative of your entire service area. They would make a recommendation that would come back to the council for consideration. Once you approve that, you would authorize Mary Jane and myself to transmit that to DEP. We would hear their response. It could take you know, some matter of time to work back and forth. But again, also Mary Jane mentioned they were open to just having unofficial conversations with us as well.
Yeah, well, listening to Mary Jane's comment in regards to response number 4, I it doesn't sound like they're very amenable to that, so that doesn't look really good.
Let me mention one other thing that,
Well,
I
let
think.
me finish.
Okay, and then I do have a point.
Okay, and, so in my mind, the reject offer would be, I would be more prone to go that route than to go number 4 or 1 and 3. Just trying to get my opinion out so everybody knows.
Okay.
Let me mention one thing, if you do agree to the consent order, whether it be pay the fine in full or do the in-kind project or some mix, there is a statement in this letter, which essentially you're agreeing to, the offers put out in their letter, but it does acknowledge that you are not admitting liability for the violations. You are simply agreeing to settle it, and it is not an admission of liability. We have made it known to them that we do dispute the number of days on which this is based. They've made it known to us back that, they don't see it that way. And it's, again, the way the law is in this area, that, they believe they have the right to fine us for the full 200 days. Additionally, their statutory provisions that would apply here would have allowed the fine to have been much more. And they believe they could, if they went to court or to an administrative proceeding with us, they could fine up to $15,000 or ask for that much per day. So again, they have already made adjustments to account for, various factors that, we presented to them in the course of this and that they just simply recognize. So, the 500,000 a day at 200 days, in their mind is already an adjustment down. So again, I just offer that for your information and also so that you're aware, if you were to agree to settle this, you're not admitting liability.
Okay, thank you.
Mary Jane?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
As a point of clarification, has there been any discussion or is there a possibility of a combination of items, responses 2 and 3?
I don't know, I mean, yes, we haven't discussed that with them, but I do think that, I know just in these types of proceedings, whether you go to an administrative hearing or go to court, there are times when you can stipulate to certain things. And if they would agree to that, then you can stipulate to certain things and have only certain issues be for the court or the judge to decide. But they would have to agree to do it that way and not to put the whole thing in front of them. And we have not explored that.
Well, the executive summary to me is that items 1 and 4 could result in a more negative outcome than what we're facing today. Item 2, where we would pay the $1 million fine outright, would result in nothing coming back to our community. So to me, the most logical approach would be an agreement with Randy to go with option 3, which is to do something that would meet the criteria that you set out, plus bring something back into our community that would be helpful long term.
I think we would certainly have more control over and certainty as to what this would mean, and into obviously selecting, the proposals and putting together the package that would satisfy DEP and the value that they're looking for, but also, as you say, bring benefit back to our customers and ratepayers.
Yeah. Otherwise, $1 million
And our
is just
community,
gone.
Exactly.
Right.
I think too, right along with your thinking, it's the same. I feel like if we just pay the fine, we've just spent that money, but it really hasn't provided good. And we focused so long, ever since we've been a council, on infrastructure, local and outside the city, and environmental. And so to me, that falls even more naturally in where we have a strong interest in, and some background at this point. So I would think that. Tom?
Well, I find some certainly that I don't like in each one of these, but probably what makes us the least unhappy looks like it's pointing toward option 3. Based on that, I would move that we accept the recommendation to go with option 3.
All right. Do we have a second?
Second, but I'm interested to hear what JD has to say, what you think.
You know, I just don't want it to take away from other projects that we already have. That was my fear, that you're saying, hey, well, this has gotta come from somewhere. And we've already got other projects that we're working on and we've already committed to it. I just don't want it to take away from the funding of these other projects.
It will.
Yeah.
It
And
will.
that's what I'm concerned
And
about.
that's the crux of what the council is going to be considering next. Because as you know, you underwent a 1.5 long rate study at the cost of $100,000 because you didn't have sufficient reserves. And that was at the recommendation of your regional water board. DEP recognizes that. And so, as Mary Jane said, that means there's gonna have to be a reprioritization of things that are already deferred maintenance and capital. The reason for that is because we have an unprecedented growth rate in one of the fastest growing counties in the state. And so we're just like every other utility with a 20% annual growth rate that we're trying to keep up without our ratepayers seeing such a significant increase. So what work the staff will have in front of them is to look at those projects that the regional water board, representative of a majority of non-city residents, have already discussed just tangentially as being in support of, and asking ourselves, does it meet those criteria that the city attorney opined on, that clearly there be an impact to this area, that there be an environmental benefit and so forth. And then we'll look to see how we can leverage best state and federal funding. Then we're gonna call those other agencies and we're going to see if there is available funding, so that hopefully when we bring recommendations back to you, we will not have a commitment of a cost share, but we can at least give you some type of a feeling from a staff level of whether there would be opportunities potentially for leveraging your local dollars with non-local dollars. So we're gonna be calling state and federal agencies to see if any of these projects can leverage your ratepayer dollars, and that will be part of recommendations we bring back to you. Because there is going to have to be a realignment. Otherwise, you will go back to having a difference in rates that you work very hard to make sure that your customers inside and outside the city pay the same. It's gonna have to be one or the other. We just hope to drive down that cost by leveraging grant monies if we can.
Can I ask one more question before we move?
Sure.
Okay. If, let's just hypothetically say we was to go to, not accept this proposal, this motion that's on the floor potentially at this point, and we were to go to respond to number 4, the option where we have an alternative proposal for settlement, and we was to go to DEP and request it, we would like to do option 3, but we think that that's an excessive amount. What if we was to reduce it to $1 million as opposed to 1.5 for a project that we didn't do an improvement material house? And what time frame would we have from that point before we would have to come back and approve or not approve that what they offer? I mean, I like option 3 better, but that's a significant amount of money. If we had the option to still do that, but if we go to option number 4, it gives us the alternative to maybe try to settle for a lesser amount that we could do and live with. Maybe they'll be amenable to that. What's the worst they could do, say no?
They can say no, yes. And I think they,
Worse. Can I share,
Yeah,
from
well, and-
staff's point of view?
I think they did tell us no
They
on
did,
that.
they did
Yeah.
tell us no. You know me well. And I don't see a positive outcome. What I heard from the meeting and the discussion between attorneys and the district director is that DEP is well within the statute and the rule, and they have broad discretion. And as Mary Jane said, it could be 3 times the amount that it is now. The general counsel said several times, it gets no worse than this, that he will take this to trial any day of the week because they want to set an example. That is why it is the headline number that it is. They want to set an example so that no contractor who's in a rush ever thinks to do something without getting the line locates and having it inspected again. So they know it is a large number. He specifically said, the general counsel said, if it causes a rate increase, look, he said, speaking for myself, he doesn't have an issue with that. because environmental law being what it is, they, again, Mary Jane said, felt like they had already reduced it to a third of what it could be, and the contractor is paying double. So I think they sent a very strong message that, that resulted in us coming in front of you today and not wanting to give you an optimistic outlook if we were to challenge the number. So as Mary Jane said, we will, but I did not walk away with any kind of optimism, and I heard the message loud and clear that they will make an example of it.
And let me just say one more thing real quickly. You know, I've heard you say before, we have to look at the cost of fighting versus the outcome as well. And even though, yes, there's some arguments we can make arguments about the number of days, the fact that, you know, the city did not, you know, were they really culpable here? All of that, we can't deny the fact that there was a cross connection. And again, we could go in and we could fight all of that, but you would be entering into and engaging in complex and controversial and very adversarial litigation, which, as you know from experience, will cost. So.
Okay, well then, one last question. I keep saying it, but I might lie to you. But when this event occurred, which is hard to fathom to begin with, Midway Water was out there on that job site, were they not?
No,
Who was out, who was,
the contractor.
just the contractor, no one else?
So that's correct. So as our after action report addresses, the contractor moved forward with excavating the site and making the connection without the line locates. Now, by the accounts of the contractor and the inspector who showed up later that afternoon after the site had been filled back in, there were no line locates or flags. Midway in their report stated that a couple days prior that the line had been located, but there were no flags, there was no spray paint. And we have not spoken with Midway about that kind of discrepancy, but I know that they discussed that with DEP. So whether they did or didn't, the fact is that the contractor did not wait on the line locates. The contractor, by their own admission, did not locate the water line or the sewer line before making the connection, obviously the inadvertent cross connection.
I was just curious as to why their fine was so much less than our fine. How did they determine, I think, what, 300,000 for them versus ours, $1 million?
Because I think that, you know, again, the connection was supposed to be made for our line. It was to our line. It was a sewer connection. And so but yet the contractor tapped into Midway's water line. Midway, you know, other than locating its lines, which again, there seems to be discrepancy on whether they did or didn't, at least in the, you know, the reports afterwards, you know, they wouldn't have otherwise, they would have known, or they should have known, they did know from the 811 alert system, but, you know, it wasn't their line that was being tapped into or was supposed to be tapped into. And so I think that is my impression as to why DEP sees their culpability here is less than the others.
Did the contractor pull his permit with the county or the city?
So to make a tap, the permits were pulled with the county, but to make a tap, there's no permit, there's an application.
Just curious, because when
Yeah.
I do certain jobs, we have to pull a permit and it's inspected by a county inspector, so I didn't know if that was policy with this or not, so you're telling me it's not.
Right. And there, as the after action report talks about, there are protocols which we have now put in place as a result of our investigation to do our utmost to ensure that this doesn't happen again. And we talked about at the Regional Water Board meeting, we expect there's going to be many conversations for a long time to come about this.
That sounds like some changes are definitely in place, need to be done. Okay.
Mary Jane, just one follow-up on that combination of 2 and 3. Would it be feasible to commit to the state this week or whenever you have to report back that we've selected option 3, but then as we get engaged in what it would take to get to completion with option 3. And it's not something that we would want to do to other projects. Would they be agreeable at that time to say, for example, we raise everybody's bill by roughly $1 a month, which would be half of the $1 million, and then do half of the environmental piece, which would be $750.
What we can do, and again, what they did indicate, they did not indicate they would back down on the full $1.5 million value, but they did indicate that they would be amenable to a combination of cash payments and
Right,
the
okay.
project. So yes, I think the answer is that we could come up with something that is not burdensome to the ratepayers, but does have some cash component to it, in addition to various, capital improvement plans that we could do over time, in addition to what we already have planned.
Yeah, I agree with JB's concern on that issue, and at least that would give us some room to do something different if we're at the end of the day and we've got to make a decision.
Well, and
Precisely what it is that we're going to do.
yeah, and again, we will have 60 days to come up with the plan. And one thing, there are some revisions that need to be made in what they proposed to us. They agreed that, the documents they put together didn't exactly fit in terms of how it would be laid out. And so what, we may be able to do is to do some negotiating with them on those terms and the ability to do the combination and put that into, what would be agreed to and executed by the city.
The bottom line is, it's government suing governments, and the taxpayers are the ones who pay the penalty.
Exactly.
And that's what's so frustrating. Oh, we'll take it to court, well, the bottom line is, it's all the taxpayers are gonna pay this, on both sides. It's a lose-lose situation all the way around, so to me, I think we should just give them what they want. They want us to raise the rates and let the taxpayers and let the citizens do it. I don't, that's just my opinion. And bite the bullet and pay it.
Public comments coming up.
Any other council comment before I ask for public comment? We can go back to council comment. And let me just say, and this is, right now, we are just obviously very focused on which plan and not specifically any plan. And so so I just want to make sure for public forum, with your raising your hand, that it's strictly within what we're talking about now. Okay, that's fine, come on up. Just state your name and address, and we have, I'm sorry.
Mayor, I believe there was a motion made and a second.
Oh, there was,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, so the
But
public.
I don't think it was seconded, is that correct?
Was there a
I
second?
don't know, John.
I don't.
Did you
I don't-
I said I would second it once we heard the
Okay.
Okay.
concerns.
All right, so we can then proceed.
With
The motion has not fails at the moment because for lack of a
All right, we
second.
have it.
We can come back to another motion if the council wants further
So
discussion.
okay. Is that?
Yep.
All right. Okay, so your name and address, and then we have a limit of 3 minutes.
Okay, my name is Dara Lynn Hardigan, and I'm the president of Save Our Soundside. I live at 4601 Soundside Drive, one of the affected properties. And I just want to speak to the option regarding environmentally beneficial projects for the area. This area of the peninsula, and this is something that we haven't talked about here yet, but the midway area of the peninsula where this occurred is less than a mile wide. And we have, the whole peninsula was zoned for low density family residential, and it's R1. Well, that includes 50-foot wide lots now. We have at least 8 subdivisions going in out there on the Soundside Drive and in that area. A lot of clear cutting, a lot of red clay, not supposed to run off into the waterways, but it does. We're talking about quality of life issues. To the north of the peninsula, we've got a Class 2 waterway, one of 11 in the state, where aquaculture for oyster beds and the Restore Act monies have been paid for those oyster beds in there. And to the south of the peninsula, less than a mile away, across this narrow strip of land, we have a Florida outstanding waterway, which is the Sound. So whenever you're thinking about which option to take and doing some environmentally beneficial projects for this area of Midway where the citizens have been, so their quality of life has definitely been detrimentally affected, we are hoping that you will give that some real consideration on behalf of the citizens. And as far as raising our rates to pay for the fine, I know that as a citizen and someone that was affected by this, it just kind of adds insult to injury. And so that's basically what I wanted to say.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
All right, thank you, Darren. All right, any further, so now do we have a second? Do we need to start the motion over? All right.
We have a second.
Did you second it?
I thought I did.
Oh,
Okay.
okay, I apologize, I thought.
Okay, I thought you did too.
Because that's nothing.
Okay, so-
Right, so we have I believe you may want to restate the motion and, just to be sure everyone's clear on what it was, but I think it was, Mayor Pro Tem Nail made the motion to.
I move that we accept the staff's recommendation that we choose option 3.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same
No.
sign. Okay, passes 4-1. All right, so, then the staff will, at this point, get to work on, where we go next with this, and obviously we'll be seeing very quickly ideas and thoughts and plans. All right, let me see, let me get back to the beginning here. All right, discussion items for tonight. Do we have any discussion items? New business? Public forum?
Oh, I am so sorry. Discussion items, Mayor Pro Tem Tom Nail, we had talked about the National Junior Honor Society and Government Day, and whether to proceed with that on February 5th and February 7th. And so he has heard from some of the youth who are involved, and I'll turn it over to him to have a discussion with council.
Okay.
Well, apparently, the people involved know who they are, and are very excited about it. It was announced, excuse me, it was announced apparently like Friday or something, and by the weekend the kids they knew who they were impersonating, and they were very excited about it. So at the same time, I know we're looking at whether we can pull this off because of the social distancing required when the kids meet with the council. I hope we can find some way to make that work. It's a big plus. It's something that means a lot to the kids, and hopefully able to do it.
Maybe, have you talked to the sponsor, Samantha?
Yes, ma'am, we
And-
have, and she very much wants to proceed, but we also know that they would certainly understand during this rise in COVID. It's a difficult call. You have the sponsor's enthusiasm, you have the students' enthusiasm, and as you know, it's very heavily attended by families. It's a special event, and so we would either proceed with February 5th for the breakfast and the Government Day, and February 7th for the takeover council day, or we would push back and look for an alternative date, maybe in early spring. And so we just wanted to take the temperature of the council to see how you were feeling about that.
I guess my thought would be, that is one of our favorite activities that we have. But I do have concern about where we could provide enough space for parents to come and spread out. I guess I'm kind of mixed on it. I would say maybe wait a month, but I'm throwing that out there. I don't have strong feelings about it. Any of you?
It seems to be a good seating to spread out?
Here, would, do you think it's?
We can definitely spread out the crowd here. As you recall, because it's been 2 years since we have done this, but the student will be sitting where you are now, and you will be sitting behind them, whispering, to them. So the other thing is, they'll have to make that motion by Robert's rules.
What about during the day with staff too? And I guess I'm kind of thinking about exposure in that direction as well.
We have not limited our facilities as of yet, and so
Okay.
we'll take individual, cautions as needed, but we have not gone back into our pandemic plan as of yet.
Okay, all right, so Council Lee, is that kind of?
I like it, I look forward to it, it's a lot of fun, yeah.
Okay, all right,
Okay, thank you.
all right. Next we have public forum. All right, and then we have, Robert? Yes. Robert, say your name and address, please. Sure. And our limit is 3 minutes. Robert comes all the time, so.
Talks a lot.
Yes, it's kind of like, yeah.
Robert Turpin, 2 Madrid. I want to wish everyone a Happy New Year. It's great to be back. I guess my comments more related to the previous action item regarding the potential taxpayer-funded restoration projects. And I would hope, as we've seen with a lot of large ticket items, that we would be able to request FDEP to give us sufficient time so that we implement good projects that have a good return on the citizens and the ratepayers' investments. And that probably will mean that we spread things out a little bit more and request for sufficient time to come up with a good plan instead of just throwing, $1.5 million worth of projects out there as a ratepayer and as all of us are beneficiaries of a quality environment, that we would choose those carefully and we would ask DEP to give us sufficient time to make those good choices. And I guess it's somewhat surprising that we as ratepayers are going to pay for the mistakes of a contractor, but that is the situation we find ourselves in, and I trust that we will make good safeguards to prevent something like this from happening again, not only for the financial burden to the citizens, but also the impacts to the affected parties through contamination of drinking water. And I just want to make sure that we don't repeat those kinds of errors again. So thank you for your time and Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robert.
Welcome back.
Happy New Year.
All right, any other comments? We are now adjourned. Thank you very much.
She didn't want to take it. I gave you. Yeah, I got to sleep.
Thank you.